you obviously heard the irony of that. The last time we saw you, we were talking about specifically about the railroad workers, and here we are.
Can't say we're too surprised.
Last week we had on a couple of guys from people from the union, a journalist from there, and a driver, like one of the drivers, and specifically talking about what went wrong. And this was all preventable.
It was absolutely preventable, right? And I don't know. I mean, like you guys know this, and I imagine anyone who has seen my work or perhaps caught me on previous shows will understand why my head is frankly exploding right now. And not just me, but my colleague Mel Buer has been running around doing the rounds as well. We were on last time, as you mentioned, to talk about the high stakes contract fight that was playing out over the course of last year. What a lot of people don't realize is that was actually year number 3 of the contract negotiations. So even when we started reporting on it, over a year ago, we were still 2 years late to this contract fight. Like, no one was really paying attention to it. But then we started talking to more workers. I was interviewing retired workers, current workers, about the sort of like certain issues that I was hearing about on the railroads, right? So I think we mentioned last time, the first time that I interviewed someone for the Real News Network was when I spoke to Jeff Kurtz, a retired locomotive engineer who also works with Railroad Workers United in a volunteer capacity. I interviewed Jeff about a strike that was going to happen, where 17,000 conductors and engineers for BNSF Railway were prepared to strike at the beginning of February last year, and a district court blocked them from being able to do that. They were prepared to strike over a draconian new attendance policy that workers said was going to make everything worse. It was going to drive people out of the industry. It was going to hurt the supply chain because it was going to run workers into the ground. And lo and behold, that's what happened. Now, the reason I'm going into this backstory is because what Jeff told me then, and what has only become truer, with every passing day, is he's like, you need to understand this goes much deeper than one strike or one attendance policy or even one carrier. The issues that are driving so many railroad workers to flee the industry in record numbers, the reasons that people who have been on the railroads for 15, 20 years and are trying to get to retirement are considering giving all that up because they can't take it anymore, right? Are all the reasons that we talked about the last time on this show. All the things that were at issue that workers were trying to get the rail carriers to address, like, the constant year after year staff cuts, the cutting corners, cutting costs at any way they could do it. Just cut your operating costs year after year after year, so that you could keep jacking up, shareholder dividends, stock buybacks, executive pay, so on and so forth. So how does this play into what we're watching in East Palestine right now? Well, folks can, as I always say, don't take it from me, take it from the workers. You can listen to interviews that we've published at the Real News recently. Last week as well with Jeff Kurtz was there. Matt Weaver from the Maintenance of Way Workers in Ohio. And also I interviewed Jay, a longtime dispatcher on Breaking Points, who very eerily predicted a scenario almost exactly like what happened in East Palestine when I interviewed him for my podcast last summer. And so I say all this because I know that folks who are looking for answers right now are finding piecemeal answers in mainstream media coverage. There's a lot of talk about, for instance, the braking systems on these trains. That is a big, important, issue. The fact that these 2-mile-long trains are still using Civil War era air braking systems is bonkers to me. But that's only a fraction of the bigger picture. What I really want people to understand from the jump, and then I promise I'll shut up, is that this is really the culmination of all of those grievances that workers were shouting about to anyone who would listen. And sadly, a lot of people did not listen, but they were saying, you can't just keep cutting staff across the board because because in East Palestine, you can see the result of those staff cuts. It's not just reducing the number of crewmen on the trains, because, I mean, remember, the rail carriers want to get one person operating those 2-3 mile long trains. Right. And thankfully, there were 3 people on this train because there was actually a trainee on board. There would have only been 2 otherwise. But it's not just that. It's the maintenance of way guys, the guys who check the track, right? They have been cut too. So now you have fewer people covering larger territories of track. They're not going to be able to get to all of that. I'm hearing stories of railroad tracks in disrepair around the country, but also the guys in the machine shop who are supposed to be inspecting and fixing the rail cars. We know from the initial Surface Transportation Board report that it does look like there was a bearing issue, that there was a bearing that was on fire and failing, and that's what triggered the hotbox detector just before the train derailed. So those are things that the carmen are tasked with inspecting, but because of the staff cuts, because of this Wall Street mindset that has taken hold of the industry, these guys there used to be more of them. They used to spend 5-6 minutes crawling all over those cars, inspecting every bearing, every axle, every corner. Now they basically have 60 seconds to kind of give a car a once over and say, okay, yeah, that looks good, because that is the quota they're being asked to make. And if they don't make it, they're the ones who get punished for it. And it's not just that. I can keep going. The signalmen have also suffered staff cuts. The signalmen are the ones who are tasked with maintenance of the signals, the technology that is on the track, like those hotbox detectors that are supposed to pick up whether or not you have an axle or a bearing problem. Those guys have also been cut. And so now, like the maintenance of way guys, they are now fewer people who are covering much more expansive territories. They don't have time to actually maintain these hotbox detectors. They're just running like a quick government approved test on them and moving on, right? So all of this shit is kind of culminating in this. And the thing I want to stress to everyone is that it's not just like, oh, this horrific tragedy happened in East Palestine, and now it's going to be okay. No, what railroaders are telling me is like, this could happen again anywhere, any second, because we have done literally nothing different yet.
Okay. And here's something that also freaked me out when we had them on last week that I learned, which is quite disturbing. And this is not even a railroad thing, rail carrier thing as much as a regulation thing. So apparently, in order for a rail or a certain train to be qualified, categorized as hazardous, there has to be X amount of cars on that train that are within that category. So in other words, if there's just one, then that train is not marked as my mind was exploding with this. And I said, so you're telling me if there's just one car, because really it only takes one. And the thing is that individual car will be marked accordingly. But the entire train is not like labeled, registered in the system as it's running on the tracks as hazardous.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important point for people to know, right? Because that's where people watching and all of us as informed democratic citizens need to be cutting through the bullshit here, right? Because what these carriers will say is they'll say, we were abiding by federal regulations. So anyone with 2 neurons in their brain will say, well, that doesn't seem right. So there must be a problem with the regulations. Yeah, you're right. It's because you have all of these greasy lobbyists and bought off politicians loving each other down in DC. And so they are making the regulations so scant and so insignificant. And so, I mean, I'm not going to say they're insignificant, but they are clearly not sufficient. And so you can allow a train like a 2-mile long Norfolk Southern train with this much hazardous material that doesn't have to classify itself that way. That is absurd.
Thanks for watching. If you want to support our mission to transform politics into service, please like this video, subscribe, follow us on social media, and consider joining our Patreon, where you'll get early access to our interviews as well as other exclusive content. Links are in the description. Peace out.